Welcome back for the third and final installment of replacing the valve cover gaskets on the 1999 Acura RL. We are on to the driver's side now. Of course, there are different things to remove on this side than there are on the passenger side, so we're going to take them one by one. I'm going to start first of all with the coil packs. So I'm going to unclip each one of these, slide it off. There we go. Alright, so I'm going to remove the coil packs. So again, 8 millimeters. Okay, so there's a cable right here. We're going to take this off. Just unclip it and unclip it from here. Give us a little bit of slack there. And then this bracket right here needs to come off. So there's a 10 millimeter holding it on. The best bet is to go ahead and take this connector off the bracket, and then you can easily get to the bolt that's holding this bracket on here. There we go. So that's what it looks like. Alright, next we're going to go after the oxygen sensor, which is right here. So I'm going to unclip it first from this top clip. Just unclip it like that. And then there is a tab on this side. So I'm going to squeeze a tab and then slide it off the bracket. You'll see the bracket in a second here. So squeeze that and then slide it this way. There we go. We need to take it also off the valve cover. So I'm going to actually disconnect it here. So right there, squeeze that and then pull it out like that. Pull that off, and same thing on this one. There we go. So our oxygen sensor's off now. Alright, so this next part, I'm going to remove the EVAP per solenoid. There are a lot of different ways you can clear out this area. This is how I'm going to do it though. So I'm going to disconnect the connector here. Take that off. I'm going to take the line off next. Pull that off. So let me give this a shot. This connector is really on here pretty tight though, so there we go. Yeah, that's a bit tricky to get to that bracket back there. Alright, so I'm going to remove this clamp here, slide that down the hose. Then there's a bolt right there. I'm going to take that off and just pull this whole thing off as an assembly. Alright, lift this up, pull this through, and just twist this off hopefully. There we go. So that's off now. Alright, so we'll get to the vacuum line later. I'm going to disconnect the fuel injectors next. There's one, and the second one, and the third one. There's a bolt on top for our wire harness. I'm going to take that off. Alright, so we're going to move to the back of the cylinder head here, and there is a fuel return line right there. We do not want to disconnect that. We're just going to unclip it, take it off the bracket. Okay, so I'm going to remove this EVAP line here. So just slide the clamp off. There we go. Alright, so back here there is a bolt holding this bracket on. We need to take that off. There we go. Alright, so the bracket that I just disconnected back there is in two parts. So this is one of those parts that is for our fuel return line, and then The other part is just part of the vacuum hose assembly back there, so make sure you don't lose this. Alright, so I am going to remove the battery because I'm going to have to slide the fuse box over this way because one of the nuts for the valve cover is right in front of the fuse box. So you could try to use a swivel socket or some other method to get in there to get it out, but you may frustrate yourself and it may just be a lot easier to take the battery out and then slide the fuse box over. I've done this numerous times in the video, so we're going to take the negative off first. Set that aside, then we'll take our positive off. I don't have the hold down on here, but normally there'd be a hold down for the battery. Take this out. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take the bolts out for the fuse box, and before I do that I'm actually going to unclip this cruise control line right there. Go. First thing I'm going to do is take the cover off. Then there's a bolt right here, 10 millimeters. A second bolt right there, 10 millimeters. Press the tab that way, lift up like so. So this bracket, slide the tab that way, lift up. Next, I remove this bolt that's holding the wire harness onto the bracket. Alright, so to give ourselves even more room, we need to get our cruise control out of the way. So first I'm going to unclip this connector from the bracket. Just pull the tab this way, then lift up. Okay, so that's off the bracket. And then there are 3 bolts holding this down. Okay, just need to move this over a little bit. Okay, so now our fuse box is further over. You may want to also unclip it. There's a clip right there that goes into the tower. So here's the pry tool. See if we can get in there and get this out. There we go. And if you want even more space, you could actually take the power lines off here, and that'll slide the whole box all the way over. Yep, 8 millimeters. Okay, then just slide the power lines out that way. And now our fuse box can come much further. There we go. You can take this bracket off if you want. I think I'm going to take that off too, I might as well. There we go. Alright, so we should be able to take our 4 10mm nuts off with the valve cover. Let's go ahead and do that. Grab a magnet for that one. There we go. Alright, so we just need to remove our vacuum hose bracket back here. There we go. Okay, so there is a bracket right here. I probably would take that off also. Alright, there we go. That's off. Just about dismantled this whole side of the car. It's a lot of stuff to take off just to get the valve cover off. Alright, so I've got the pry tool here. Now I don't have as many spots to leverage as I had on the other side, so I'm going to be very careful here. I've got fuel injectors, I've got a bunch of lines back here, I've got the fuel rail, I've got some harnesses, so I'm going to try to be careful around those items. So I'm going to go in kind of over in this area, it looks like, and I'm going to use the intake manifold to leverage. Got a fuel line right there I got to be careful of too. There we go. It might be good enough. Let me see if I can pull this out now. There we go. All right, again, the valve cover gasket may get stuck to the cylinder head, so just be prepared for that. That's not a big deal. All right, so I'm going to pull the valve cover off, and you may want to pull these grommets off before you take the valve cover off because some of those may try to fall down inside the engine compartment. But these seem to be pretty stuck on, so I'm going to go ahead and just lift the valve cover off. There we go. Yeah, this is definitely the tougher of the two sides. Alright, so we've got the tube seals on. I've got the new valve cover gasket on. I put a little bit of sealant between the valve cover gasket and the valve cover, so in each one of these corners. And that's because I'm a little worried about this falling off as I try to put it back on the cylinder head. So I'm going to let this set up for a few minutes, and then what we'll do next is we'll apply some sealant either to these corners, like we did on the other side, or we'll put it on the cylinder head, or we'll do both. Alright, so this is ready to go back in. I got about 5 minutes of working time with this, so I'm going to put this back on. And this is a tougher side, so I may get in your way here a little bit. Okay, I got it partway down, looks like. Alright, so yeah, definitely I would recommend putting a little bit of sealant between the gasket and the valve cover because this is a really hard side to do. So I'm going to slide this just a little bit to seat it. Okay, so I've got the grommets on there, those top two and then the bottom two, and I tightened the nuts down a little bit so I could get these grommets to squish down because I still got to get this vacuum line back in too. Now that I've got those squished down, I back the nuts off, and what I'm going to do is put this in. And right on top of our grommets like that. Alright, so I'm going to put the nuts on now. Alright, so we want to tighten these nuts down. And remember, you do that in 2 stages. So tighten it down just enough to feel like you got some resistance. So you're going to do this one first, the top left, bottom left, top right, bottom right. And then we'll tighten it down to 9 foot-pounds as our final tightening. So here's our oxygen sensor. Route that over this way. Put that back in the holder underneath here. There we go. So at least I've got it over here for now. So I don't have to try to reach down there later on. So I think I'm going to get this vacuum hose bracket over here hooked back up since I've got the space right now. Alright, so this bracket right here for the fuel line that goes back here between the vacuum bracket and the valve cover. The tough part is getting this part back in the hole in the back of the valve cover because I can't see it. I think it's in there. Try putting the bolt in now. Alright, so I know I was in your way, but that was a pain to get back in there. So I've got it started right now. I'm going to tighten it down now. Okay, so that's tightened down. So I'm putting the fuel line back in the bracket, as you can see, hopefully. Probably a lot of stuff in your way. It's back in there. I'm going to put the hose back on. It's all the way up. Okay. This hose sticking up right here. I'm going to put that back on the vacuum line, so don't forget that. This goes back up like that. Okay, so this bracket I'm going to put on next. That goes right here. This bracket will go on next. That goes right next to the one we just put on. Alright, got that started. So your back will get a bit of a workout doing this job. Alright, so I'm going to put this bolt that's holding our power line onto the bracket. I'm going to put that back in. There we go. I'm going to put the fuel injectors back on up here. Make sure they snap in. Alright, so there's a bolt that goes up here. We're going to put that back in. Okay. Now that I've got that back on, I'm going to put the PCV valve in temporarily. If I have to take it out, I'll take it out again, but I don't think I will. I want to make sure this hole is closed up. That's why I want to do that now. Alright, so I'm going to put the solenoid on over here, like so. I'm not going to bolt it down just yet. I need to get the line back in first. So I'm going to put this line on. There we go. There we go. Alright, so I'll bolt this down now. Okay, then I'll put our connector back here in. There we go. And we'll put our hose back on here. Put our connector back on there. So that takes care of this solenoid. Alright, so I've got this bracket now. I'm going to put that on right over here for our wire harness. There we go. This can go back on that bracket right there, this connector. Again, remember I broke this part over here off. So I'm going to zip tie that back on. We got our oxygen sensor and our vacuum hose down here. So I'm going to pull the oxygen sensor up and slot that in on the bracket. Put our vacuum hose on. That goes right here on this pipe, right there. Slide that back on. There we go. Connect our oxygen sensor back up. Slide that back on the bracket here. There we go. Alright, so I'm going to put the fuse box back in now. Slide this all the way back. Remember, there is also a clip right here, and then there's also this white clip right there that goes into the tower over here. Slide that in. That's in. Put our white clip in down here. Alright, that's back in. Alright, so there are two bolts holding the fuse box down. I'm going to put those back in. Put our power lines back in. So out of all these bolts that I'm putting back in, these are the only two that are 8 millimeters. So I wouldn't get too carried away with tightening these down. Alright, so this bracket right here, I'm going to pull that up this way. And I'm going to slot that in on this side on the fuse box. Snaps back in. Then we'll put our cruise control back in. Those are 3 bolts that are holding that down. There's a little hose right there, so make sure you get that back in the hole down there. Hopefully you can see that. There's a little hole right here, so make sure you get your hose in there. All right, then we'll put our connector back on the bracket right here. All right, I'm going to put the fuse box cover back on. All right, I'm going to slot this cable back in, right back here, right up here, and right there. And there's a cable right here, slot that back in, right there. I'm going to put the ignition coils back in next. Alright, so I think the torque spec is 8 or 9 foot-pounds. I can never remember this. I think it's 8 foot-pounds. And I'm just going to use the 8mm on my impact. So we'll put our connectors on next. Put this back in while I'm at it. Make sure those snap in place. Alright, so I'm going to put this back in for the battery. Battery cable's back on. So we do positive first, then negative. Alright, so what I'm doing right now is installing the engine cover. We're going to put the bolts in the front first. I'm just going to tighten these down with the impact. We've got our bolt back here. It goes in right there. Nut. And another nut. Alright, I'm going to put the strut bar back in next. Okay, that's back on. And we'll put our nuts and bolts back in. Those are all 12mm. Alright, so the torque spec on the nuts and the bolts is 16 foot-pounds. And then just slot our AC line back in the bracket. Alright, so we've got everything back together. Now by the time you finish up this job, the sealant should have dried on the cylinder head, so you can go ahead and drive the car. It takes about a half hour for that to set up, and that should be about it. Alright, so there you have it. There's replacing the valve cover gaskets on the 1999 Acura RL. And as you saw, the passenger side is not too bad. The driver's side, there are a lot of brackets, and the fuse box and the battery and the cruise control unit, those all should come out because that'll give you a lot more space and you'll be less inclined to be frustrated when you do this job. So hopefully this information was helpful, and thanks for watching.